They say the Appalachian Mountains are ancient, older than bones, older than memory. But age doesn't just bring wisdom, it breeds secrets. Hidden paths no map dares show. Voices that echo from caves no sunlight reaches. People vanish here, not to time, but to something much darker. Locals speak in hushed tones of lanterns that float without bearers, of children that return home. Wrong, and tonight, you're going to hear what most only whisper at the edge of a dying fire. These aren't stories, they're warnings. If you're brave enough to stay with us, hit that subscribe button to join Farcical Fears, and let's descend together into the true horror pulsing deep within Appalachia. Just don't listen too closely, because some things in these woods remember your name. The red string of Briar Hollow, deep in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. Nestled between ancient ridges and tangled forests, lies a place few speak of, and even fewer dare to explore. Briar Hollow. The locals avoid it, passing down stories whispered over campfires, tales of vanished hikers, eerie lights flickering through the trees at night, and strange sounds that echo through the valleys when the wind dies down. It's a place that seems to resist time itself, where the laws of nature bend just enough to unsettle anyone who ventures too far. For Corey, a 22-year-old with a restless spirit and a fascination for the unknown, Briar Hollow was the perfect challenge. Corey had dropped out of college months earlier, drawn not to textbooks, but to the wilds, where forgotten legends lurk. His YouTube channel, though small, was growing thanks to his daring expeditions into abandoned places and haunted locales. But nothing had captivated his audience like the rumor of the red string, a mysterious nylon thread said to appear in Briar Hollow, weaving through the forest like a living thing. According to the stories, following the string would lead to something hidden, something old and dangerous, but also something worth uncovering. For Corey, it was the chance to finally capture the ultimate story, something that would make his channel explode in popularity. On a chilly October morning, Corey packed light, a tent, food, a flashlight, and his GoPro camera. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. As he entered the dense forest, the world seemed to close in around him, the tall oaks and pines forming a natural cathedral that swallowed sound and light. The first hours were peaceful, almost calming. He moved carefully, marking his trail, and keeping his camera rolling, but as the sun dipped lower, shadows deepened and an uneasy feeling settled in his chest. And then he saw a bright red string tied tightly to a small sapling. It was unmistakable, synthetic nylon, glowing unnaturally against the muted autumn colors. The string disappeared deeper into the underbrush, taut and deliberate. His heart quickened. This was it. Without hesitation, Corey followed the thread, letting it guide him into the heart of Briar Hollow. The path the string traced was winding, leading through thick ferns, moss-covered stones, and ancient trees twisted by time. The forest grew darker, quieter. Birds fell silent, insects stopped buzzing, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. As Corey pressed on, the trees around him started to look strange, bark peeling away in curling strips, roots writhing like snakes beneath his feet. He felt eyes watching, though whenever he turned, there was nothing but empty forest. Hours passed. The red string split into two tight lines tied to trees heading in opposite directions. Corey stopped, checking his GPS, but the screen flickered and died. No signal, no location. Nothing but the time. 5:18 p.m., the forest around him thickened, fog rolling in low, like creeping smoke. He chose the left path, his breath shallow. Every sound amplified in the heavy silence. The ground beneath his feet grew soft and spongy. The scent of copper and decay thick in the air. Then, hanging from branches, he saw them. Small totems crafted from animal bones, carefully tied together with thin sinew, swaying gently despite the absence of wind. The hair on his neck stood up as he realized these were warnings placed by someone, or something, to keep others away. Suddenly, through the fog, a figure emerged. A woman, pale and barefoot, her dress tattered and stained, her face hidden beneath a curtain of matted hair. She stood between two trees, bound tightly by the very same red string, which wrapped around her wrists, neck, and ankles in a cruel, precise pattern. She didn't move, didn't speak, but the air around her vibrated with an unsettling energy. Corey froze, his camera recording every moment. The string began to tighten slowly, creaking and snapping with tension. Then, one by one, the bindings snapped free, as if the string was alive, pulling itself tighter before breaking. The woman vanished in the mist, leaving only a cold silence behind. Fear surged through Corey. He turned to run, but the forest shifted around him. Paths twisted impossibly, trees seemed to close ranks, and the fog thickened until he could barely see his hands before his face. The red string reappeared sporadically, sometimes just a glimpse between branches. Other times tied taut across his path, cutting off escape routes. He stumbled, scraped his hands and knees, and felt the crushing weight of hopelessness. After what felt like hours, Corey collapsed beside a fallen log, exhausted and trembling. His last conscious thought was of the string, waiting, ready to pull him back into its web, days later. Hikers found the GoPro camera lying on the trailhead, its battery dead, but the last few minutes of footage still intact. The video showed Corey following the red string, encountering the bone totems, and the bound woman. But Corey himself was never found. Search parties scoured Briar Hollow, but the forest held its secrets close. Locals say the red string is not just a path but a trap, a binding force of the mountain's ancient power. It lures those who are curious or reckless, leading them away from the world and into something darker. Some say it's the curse of a long-forgotten ritual. Others believe it's the forest itself defending its mysteries. Whatever it is, one thing remains certain. Those who follow the red string rarely come back. So if you ever find yourself wandering the Appalachian woods and see a thin red thread tied between trees, remember Corey's story. Remember the silence that follows, the tightening noose of fear, and the price of curiosity. Because some strings don't just guide you home, they tie you to the darkness forever. Let's move to our second story. This one is called The Mind That Breathes. They say the Appalachian Mountains are alive, not just with birdsong and wind through the trees, but truly alive, deep below the stone, where light never reaches. Down there, the mountains remember everything we've tried to bury, and sometimes, they breathe. Back in 1972, near Harlan, Kentucky, a small privately owned coal company reopened a shaft that had been sealed for nearly 2 decades. Locals called it Hole 6B. Just a number to the company, nothing more than an unused resource waiting to be exploited. But the older folks in town remembered. They remembered the men who died down there in the 50s, when the rock collapsed for no clear reason. They remembered the stories of unnatural sounds echoing through the earth. But hard times have a way of quieting old superstitions. And when paychecks are scarce, fear is just another luxury. Among the first hired was Gerald Red Milanowski. He was born in Harlan, had worked every mine in the region, and wasn't one to scare easy. His father, a miner himself, had warned him as a child. If you ever see red moss on black coal leaf, that's where the mountain's still breathing. Red never believed in that kind of talk. Until Hole 6B. Red kept a journal. Not because he was sentimental, but because he liked to keep track of pressure readings and shift changes. His entries started normal gripes about the equipment, the poor lighting, the lack of safety oversight. But by the 3rd week, the tone changed. He started writing about the air. "It's not right," he wrote. "Too warm, tastes like rust." Then came the tremors. Not violent, just enough to make your boots feel like the ground had a heartbeat, every night. Same time. 2:11 a.m. Miners started hearing things, distant voices, whispers, cries from what sounded like children. One man claimed to hear a hymn echoing down the shaft. Another said he saw eyes in the rock watching, blinking, then gone. Then there was the string. Red described it as old rope threaded through drilled holes in the tunnel walls. Like something or someone had been marking a path, but none of the men claimed to have put it there. It was knotted every 12 feet, leading toward the lowest level. When they followed it, it just ended at a dead wall. Solid rock. A week later, Sammy Till disappeared. He was the youngest on the crew, only 24, but a good worker. Went down for a midnight inspection. Never came back. His helmet was found on a rock ledge, resting upright, as if placed there with care. His boots were still tied at the entrance of a side shaft, clean as if he hadn't taken a step. They shut the site down for 48 hours to investigate. But Red stayed behind, alone, said he needed answers. That night he wrote something strange. In his journal, "It's deeper than we think. I can feel it listening. It knows when we're here." He drew diagrams, spirals, symbols, what looked like veins wrapped around bone. On the final day anyone saw Red, he went into the mine before sunrise, carrying nothing but a headlamp, his journal, and 300 feet of rope. He tied one end to a steel anchor at the mouth of a subtunnel and walked in. Hours passed. No contact, no movement. The rope went slack. They followed it and found the line tied off deep in the shaft, attached to a rusted drill one no one remembered placing there. At the end of the rope was a single boot, singed at the heel, smoldering as if touched by fire. Red was never found. Not a trace. 2 days later, his wife received a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was Red's journal, half-burned and water-damaged. Most of the pages were unreadable, scorched black, or soaked with what looked like blood. But a few remained. The last entry was frantic. "It's not a mine, it's a lung. We aren't digging for coal, we're carving into its ribs. The mountain isn't dead. It's sleeping, and it's dreaming." He had drawn a final image, 3 concentric circles, with jagged lines pointing inward. At the center, a single red dot. Beneath it, one sentence: "If we keep drilling, it will wake up." The mine was closed that week. Permanently, a shell company purchased the land and put up barbed wire fencing, warning of toxic gas leaks. But no one ever saw a cleanup crew. The entrances were sealed with concrete, and the woods around the site grew eerily quiet. No birdsong, no deer, no wind. Locals say the earth still hums at night, a deep guttural vibration that makes your windows rattle and your bones ache. Some claim to see lights flickering near the trees, others hear faint, rhythmic breathing beneath their feet, like something massive exhaling beneath the ground. A local preacher once tried to dig near the old entrance. He didn't get far, dug no more than 6 feet, before hitting stone. He says he heard a voice in the soil, whispering, "Not yet." Since then, no one goes near hole 6B. It's a scar on the mountain's body. And every scar has a story. Just because the mountain is sleeping doesn't mean it can't dream. And if it ever wakes up, we might not survive what it remembers. Let's move to our third story. The woman under the floorboards. I was 8 the year my Gretinot died, and left my father a cabin tucked deep into a hollow in the Appalachian Mountains. So remote, the GPS refused to acknowledge its existence. We had to follow vague hand-drawn directions mailed to us, tracing logging roads, crossing creeks without bridges, and watching the cell signal die like a candle in the wind. It was the kind of place that the world had forgotten, and I wish we had to dot from the moment we arrived. The cabin gave off a stillness that didn't feel peaceful, it felt like waiting. The trees around it didn't move in the wind. There were no birds, no bugs, just silence so thick it had a texture. My father, excited to own land of his own, brushed it off. "Nothing wrong with quiet," he said. My mom, though she just looked at the place and murmured, "Something ain't right here." She was from Appalachia too, born a couple hollers over, and her voice didn't carry doubt. It carried memory. The cabin was old, built from thick mountain pine, the walls buckling inward ever so slightly. There was no insulation, just wood slats and cobwebs. The floor creaked with every step, like it resented your weight. My room was on the far end of the house, next to the hallway closet, and across from the crawlspace trapdoor. That damn trapdoor was just a loose plank, nailed down over a square cutout in the hallway floor. Nothing sealing it, no lock. Just wood covering darkness. The first night, I woke up to something brushing against the bottom of my bed. I thought it was our dog, but she was locked in the living room. It wasn't a nudge. It was a slow, gentle drag, as if something or someone was lying beneath me, their palms slowly gliding along the underside of my mattress, mapping it. I told my mom the next morning. She paused, blinked, and asked, "Did you hear her voice?" "Her?" Voice, not a noise. Not someone. I said no. My mom said, then she's just getting to know you. From that night on, I began hearing sounds from the floor at exactly 3:11 a.m., not 3:10, not 3:12, always 3:11. It started as scratching, then tapping, then whispering. It was never in English. The words made no sense, but they felt wet somehow, like they were too close to my ears. Sometimes I felt my bed shake, ever so slightly, like someone was crawling under it. But the crawl space wasn't connected to my room. So how? One morning, I found dirt in my bed. Just a few grains, gritty, between my sheets. My dad said I tracked it in, but my feet were clean, and my shoes were by the door. It escalated. I began seeing shadows move between the floorboards. You know the little cracks where the old wood doesn't line up? I saw eyes looking through. Them, not glowing ones, just eyes. Watching. One time, I dropped a toy soldier, and it rolled toward the hallway. It stopped at the trapdoor, then slipped between the planks, as if pulled. I never saw it again. Eventually, I refused to sleep in my room. My dad got angry, said I was too old for baby fears. My mom said nothing, just stared at the hallway, like she was waiting for something to come back. Then it happened. One night, Dad and I came home late from town. Mom had stayed back. As we opened the front door, we heard her screaming from inside, not shouting. Screaming like something was being torn from her. We rushed inside and found her standing on the kitchen table, holding a crucifix from her jewelry box, and crying uncontrollably. She pointed to the floor. She came up, she whispered. She came up from the damn floor. Just like when I was little, she refused to sleep another night there. My dad, furious, decided to put an end to it. He pried open the trapdoor and crawled into the crawl space with a flashlight. We heard him moving beneath the floor for a while. Then silence. He emerged pale, trembling, and holding something in a rag, a small, brittle bone, clean and yellowed. He didn't say anything, just sat on the porch, staring into the trees. That night, he nailed the crawl space shut, but it didn't matter, because she had already gotten out. The next morning, the nails were on the floor. The board was lifted clean, not torn, not forced. Just moved aside. Something had unsealed itself. After that, things grew violent. My mother was pushed down the stairs. My dad started sleepwalking into the woods. I heard footsteps circling my bed at night, even after I moved to the couch. Doors opened by themselves. Objects vanished. And every night, 3:11 a.m., the whispering came back. Louder and angrier. I remember the last night vividly. We were all sleeping in the living room. My mom had drawn salt lines around us and kept the Bible open in her lap. At 3:11, we heard her again. This time she didn't whisper. She sang a lullaby, off-key and hollow, like it was sung through water. We saw the hardwood near the fireplace begin to bulge, like something pushing up from underneath. Then her fingers emerged too long, with crooked joints bending the wrong way. One by one, they curled out from between the planks. Her head followed. No eyes, just a pale, cracked face and lips moving in sync with the lullaby. My mom threw holy water. My dad screamed. I closed my eyes. When I opened them, we were in the truck, driving fast and not looking back. We left everything behind. Years later, I did what every horror protagonist eventually does. I went back, only digitally. I found the cabin listed online as a vacation rental. Someone had renovated it. New floors, new paint, modern kitchen. The listing called it a peaceful Appalachian escape. But in one of the photos, if you zoomed in, you could see the floorboards, slightly warped under the bed in the guest room, like someone was still down there. Pressing upward, the guestbook reviews said things like strange noises at night. Felt like we weren't alone, and my daughter wouldn't sleep in the house, in the name of the property. The whispering cabin. But I know what it really is. It's not whispering. She's just waiting for someone new to sleep, over the trapdoor, and next time, she might not stop at the floor. Let's move to our fourth story. The Lantern Man. Some legends are born from superstition, but others feel carved from something older, deeper, and undeniably real. You don't hear about the Lantern Man in books or documentaries. His name isn't scrawled across campfire songs or ghost hunter blogs. No, he lives in hushed whispers passed between old-timers in the back corners of Appalachian towns, and those who speak his name do so only once. I first heard the tale from a retired forest ranger named Albert Rains. He was one of those stoic, flannel-wearing men who had nothing to prove, and even less to exaggerate. He wasn't one for ghost stories. He'd say things like most monsters are just hungry bears and ain't nothing in the woods but your own nerves. But when I brought up strange disappearances near Mercy's Hollow, his entire face changed. His jaw stiffened, and his eyes lost focus, like they were staring through something I couldn't see. That place, he said, don't follow the rules of men. It follows something else. Something ancient. I only went in there once. I came out different. Mercy's Hollow lies along a rarely used trail past Spruce Ridge, about 30 miles into the interior of the Blue Ridge Range. The land there folds in on itself, too many ridges, too many blind turns, and no cell signal for miles. Old maps mark it as Cherokee territory, with scribbled warnings about spirit lights. Some think it was sacred ground, others think it was cursed. Albert's story happened in the late 90s. There had been reports of a missing backpacker young guy named Daryl McGinnis last seen heading toward the hollow, thinking he'd found an old moonshiner's shack on an outdated topographic map. The search and rescue team combed the obvious trails, but Albert, feeling a strange pull in his gut, went alone into Mercy's Hollow. He carried the usual gear: flashlight, compass, a thermal blanket, even a flare gun. He wasn't worried until he crossed the old tree line into the hollow. The woods changed immediately. He said the air felt heavier, like breathing through wet cloth. The birds fell silent. Even the crickets and cicadas muted themselves, replaced by this faint low hum so low he could feel it in his chest more than hear it. And that's when he saw the light. It was soft at first, amber, flickering gently between the trees like someone holding a kerosene lantern just beyond reach. He called out, thinking maybe Daryl was alive, trying to signal someone. The light paused, then it moved. He followed it. He never saw anyone holding the lantern, just the glow, always ahead, weaving between trees, leading him off the marked trail. His boots sank into soft moss, the air now so thick it felt like wading through syrup. The deeper he went, the more distorted everything became. He began seeing things. Trees bent unnaturally, in spirals and arcs that no hardwood should grow. Rock formations with perfectly circular holes drilled through them, as if bored by some massive, ancient machine. After half an hour of tracking the light, Albert tried to turn back, but the trail behind him was gone. Not overgrown, not erased, just ... gone. He should have panicked, but something in him refused to scream. It was like the forest was pressing down on his thoughts, muting them, keeping him calm like a deer paralyzed in headlights. He checked his compass. It spun uselessly. His GPS blinked random symbols and coordinates from states away. Nothing made sense. The light grew larger. It had form now, tall, maybe 7 feet. Vaguely human-shaped, but elongated, like someone stretched. Through fog, no feet touched the forest floor. No arms, just a long torso, and a bright lantern, where the face should have been. Not hanging from a hand, where the face should have been. And that's when the sound returned. But it wasn't birds, or wind, it was voices. Soft at first, like whispers bleeding through water, then louder, stacking over each other, overlapping in tones and accents. A woman crying in French, a child's prayer. The distinct sound of a man screaming, "Help me," in Albert's own voice. His own voice. He fell backward. And that's when the thing moved slowly, gliding toward him. The light from its lantern face casting shadows that twisted in impossible directions. He could feel heat now, unbearable and suffocating. The ground beneath him began to smoke. Albert scrambled away, falling into a shallow ditch. He landed hard on something brittle. Bones, hundreds of bones, all charred black, all with burn marks, focused on the inside like they'd been cooked from within. He couldn't move. His limbs were locked. The lantern man hovered at the top of the ditch, unmoving, light pulsing. In that moment, Elbert said. He saw everything, every missing hiker, every lost hunter, every child who wandered off never to return. They weren't gone, they were taken. The creature didn't kill with claws or teeth. It lured. It lured with grief, with hope, with mimicry. The lantern was its bait, showing loved ones, replaying voices, tricking the mind into following willingly. It fed off the chase. But for some reason, it spared him. As the sun rose, the figure vanished. No light, no heat. Just morning birdsong, returning like a switch had been flipped. Elbert crawled back, covered in ash and dirt and bone dust, walking 12 hours straight until he found a ranger station. He told no one what he'd seen, not officially. Daryl's body was never found. But years later, 5 sets of remains were discovered in Mercy's Hollow, all scorched from the inside, and no signs of struggle around them, as if they had laid down willingly. Elbert never went back into the hollow, but he did leave something behind, a sealed oil lantern at the tree line. Attached to it was a note: "This light's mine. Leave theirs alone." To this day, hikers report strange flickering in the woods around Mercy's Hollow. Some say it's just swamp gas. Others think it's pranksters with flashlights. But the smart ones, they don't follow it, because once you do, the lantern man knows your face, and his light always finds its way home. Let's move to our 5th story. The Whispering Pines. Deep within the heart of the Appalachian Mountains lies a hidden valley, cloaked in towering pines, so dense and ancient that sunlight barely touches the forest floor. This place, known to locals simply as the Whispering Pines, is shrouded in mystery and dark tales passed down through generations. Unlike other parts of the Appalachians, where hikers and campers are welcomed by chirping birds and rustling leaves, the Whispering Pines are known for something else, entirely an eerie whispering that travels with the wind, soft and haunting, carrying voices that no one can quite understand, but many have heard. The legend began long ago, told around campfires by those who claimed to have ventured too deep into the forest and heard voices calling their names, or worse, speaking in tongues lost to time. These whispers aren't just random sounds of the forest, they are persistent, sometimes pleading, sometimes commanding. The trees themselves are said to murmur secrets of the past, and travelers who listen too closely never return the same. Our story begins with Sarah Miller, a young woman with a passion for wilderness photography and a deep love for the unexplored Appalachian wilderness. Sarah was no stranger to the woods, having spent countless summers hiking the familiar trails near her home, but the Whispering Pines called to her differently. Despite warnings from locals, Sarah's curiosity and desire for a unique photo story pushed her to venture into the valley alone, determined to capture the beauty and, perhaps, the mystery of this secluded forest. The first few days were everything. Sarah hoped for breathtaking views of sunlight piercing through the pine needles, quiet streams running over smooth stones, and wildlife unbothered by human presence. But as the sun dipped below the horizon each evening, the atmosphere shifted. It began subtly, soft noises on the edge of hearing, shadows just beyond sight. One night, while reviewing her photos by campfire light, Sarah first heard the whispers. At first it sounded like the wind sighing through the branches. But the whispers grew louder, clearer, weaving words that sent chills down her spine. "Come, stay, don't leave." Despite a rising unease, Sarah told herself it was her imagination, the exhaustion of long days hiking, and the isolation playing tricks on her mind. But the whispers continued each night, sometimes rising to a low chant that filled the forest with a haunting melody. The voices varied, sometimes a child's gentle plea, sometimes a deep, gravelly growl, warning her to stay silent. No matter how far she walked, the voices followed. As the days passed, Sarah's connection to the forest deepened in disturbing ways. She began to notice things others might dismiss. Strange symbols carved into the bark of the oldest pines, circles of stones arranged with eerie precision, and the ground softened with patches of moss that seemed unnaturally lush and alive. One evening, drawn by the whispering voices, Sarah found herself standing before an ancient tree unlike any she had seen before. Its bark was scarred with deep, strange etching symbols that seemed to pulse faintly in the moonlight, almost glowing. That night, Sarah's dreams were invaded by visions of shadowy figures, ghostly shapes that moved silently between the trees, faces obscured, but eyes glowing faintly. She dreamed of a clearing ringed with stones, stained dark with the Jolt blood, where an unseen ritual had taken place. She saw the faces of those lost to the forest, their whispers now urgent warnings. Leave before it's too late. But when she awoke, Sarah felt an irresistible pull to return to that very clearing. The next day, she found a hidden path, barely visible beneath the pine needles, leading deeper into the valley than she had ever dared venture. The air grew colder, heavier, as if the forest itself was watching. On that path, Sarah stumbled upon a forgotten cabin, its wooden frame rotted and overtaken by vines. The door creaked open, revealing a dusty interior filled with relics of a family long vanished. Yellowed newspapers on a sagging table told a grim tale of family who disappeared without a trace nearly 100 years ago, rumored to have dabbled in dark rituals to bind spirits to the forest and escape death itself. Inside the cabin, Sarah found a worn journal, pages filled with frantic scrawlings about voices from the trees and a presence that stalked the night. As she read, the whispers returned, louder and more demanding than ever. That night, camped beside the cabin, Sarah's flashlight flickered and died. The forest fell into an oppressive silence before the voices surged, surrounding her in a cold breath and a final chilling invitation: join us. Terrified, Sarah fled into the darkness, branches clawing at her as she ran. She never stopped. Hearing the whispers, never truly escaped their call. When she emerged into the nearest town days later, her spirit was broken. Her eyes hollow, her voice trembling, she warned everyone of the curse lingering in the whispering pines, but the forest's grip had taken hold. Weeks later, Sarah vanished without a trace. Her camera was found near the cabin. The final photograph, a blurred image of ghostly figures encircling the cabin in the moonlight. Faces faintly glowing, a haunting reminder that the whispering pines keep their secrets well, and those who listen too closely may never leave. Even today, locals warn visitors: never wander the whispering pines after dark. The trees don't just whisper, they call. And some answers in the Appalachian Mountains come at a terrifying price. Let's move to our sixth story: the deep thing beneath Dry Hollow. There are places in the Appalachian Mountains where even seasoned hikers hesitate to go, places not marked on maps, not mentioned in tourist brochures. Dry Hollow is one of them, tucked deep in the forgotten ridgelines of eastern Kentucky. It doesn't even show up on satellite imaging anymore. Locals say the land don't want to be seen, and maybe they're right. This story comes from a man named Darren Kestrel, a search and rescue caver with 20 years of experience. Darren had spelunked everything from underwater cave systems in Belize to lava tubes in Iceland. He wasn't the kind to scare easy. But when he was called to assist in a missing persons search near Dry Hollow, his confidence began to erode the moment he arrived. The missing person was a 17-year-old boy named Jeremy Wills, last seen near the edge of Dry Hollow 3 nights prior. Locals didn't want to get involved. Even the sheriff, an old, barrel-chested man with a face like cracked leather, looked pale when briefing Darren. "I'm only telling you this once," the sheriff warned, voiced low. "If you go down into that cave, and you hear something, say your name. You run. Don't stop. Don't listen. Don't talk to it." Darren nodded, but inside, he rolled his eyes. Another Appalachian ghost story. Mountain folk loved their superstitions. But when he and his partner Tom reached the mouth of the cave, Darren's skepticism began to chip away. There were no animal sounds, no birds, no insects. The trees around. The mouth leaned away from it unnaturally, as though pulled back by invisible strings. And the cave itself, was breathing. Not metaphorically exhaled, a slow, humid wind that smelled of wet stone, and something rotten, like meat, left too. Long in the sun, Tom volunteered to stay behind and monitor the equipment while Darren descended. The cave was oddly vertical, dropping in a perfect spiral for over 200 feet. The deeper Darren went, the smoother the rock became, not eroded, not chipped. It looked polished, as if something massive had moved through it, over and over. Halfway down, his radio cut out. Static first, then silence. Darren paused. He tried calling Tom. Nothing, then, A voice, not over the radio. Not from above, from below. It echoed up the shaft. Darren. His blood froze. The voice was unmistakably familiar, his sister's. But that was impossible. She'd died in a crash when they were teenagers. He never got to say goodbye. For a moment, logic buckled under grief. He whispered her name. Then silence again. No echoes. No reverb. The walls weren't just silent, they were swallowing sound, as if the cave itself was listening. He pushed further down, shaken, until the shaft opened into a wide, dome-shaped chamber. His flashlight beam flicked across the walls, and Darren stopped breathing. The rock wasn't rock. It was bone. Thousands of skulls fused into the walls, half-formed, some melting into each other. Eyes open, mouths screaming. The floor pulsed under his feet, a faint tremor, like a sleeping heartbeat. In the center of the chamber yawned a pit, blacker than black. Number, bottom, no sound. He dropped a small stone into it, waited. No sound. Then a breeze lifted from below, not wind, breath. Then, movement. Something rose from the pit, slow and deliberate. Darren didn't wait to see it fully. He turned and ran, but the tunnel had changed. The spiral shaft was gone, replaced by a corridor lined with red moss and wet pulsing walls. He ran blind, gasping, scraping skin off his knuckles as he clawed at the rock. The voice came again, clearer now. His sister, crying, begging for help. Darren stopped just for a second. That's when it touched him. He doesn't describe what it looked like, only what it felt like. It was like being touched by silence, he later told an interviewer. Like grief had fingers, and it remembered me. When he woke up, he was lying at the cave's mouth, blood crusted to his face, gear ripped, skin burned along his arms and chest. His partner Tom was missing. No sign of him was ever found except for his boots, still warm, placed neatly by the cave's edge. Darren resigned 2 days later. He doesn't give interviews anymore. He moved far away from the Appalachians. Says sometimes he hears his name in his dreams. And when he does, he wakes up tasting dirt and sulfur. As for Dry Hollow, they tried to seal it, but the earth cracked, open again. Trees around the area began to die. Then, one night, it swallowed a whole stretch of road near the cave. Locals avoid the area now. Even the birds won't fly over it. But every so often, a hiker vanishes. And when they do, folks in the closest towns say they hear something strange drifting down from the hills at night. Not a scream, not an animal, a voice, calling a name that isn't yours yet. Let's move to our 7th story. The Lantern Man of Pine Brush Trail. The Appalachian woods hold secrets older than the towns built beside them. Stories passed from tongue to ear for generations, so warped by time they become something more than legends, something living. Among them is a story so deeply buried in fear, people barely whisper it anymore. It's the tale of the Lantern Man of Pine Brush Trail. It was summer, and I was 16 when I first heard about it. My cousin Levi and I were staying with our grandmother in a small wooden cabin on the edge of Avery County. Grandma's house sat deep in the trees, right where the gravel stopped and the moss-covered trailheads began. It was peaceful during the day, almost idyllic. But when the sun went down, the entire forest changed its shape. The wind sounded like voices, and shadows stretched longer than they should have. I remember the first time I asked about the trail. Grandma stopped mixing her cornbread batter and said flatly, "That path ain't for wandering. You keep to the road, you hear me?" Levi, always the bold one, pressed, "Why?" She turned to face us, her eyes sharp and tired. "Because there's a thing out there. Carries a lantern, ain't right in the head, or the soul. Sometimes it's a man. Sometimes not." At first, we didn't believe her. It sounded like something a grandmother would say to keep kids from getting lost in the woods. But there was something about the way she looked out the window that night, like she expected to see it coming through the trees. We asked around town the next day, joking about it with a few locals. Every time we brought up Pine Brush Trail, people got quiet. Not just uncomfortable, scared. An old man at the gas station finally muttered, "My brother followed that light once. Came back wrong, wouldn't speak." just sat in a chair for the rest of his life staring at the fireplace, like he was waiting for something. Still, we were dumb kids with time to kill. So one night, Levi knocked on my bedroom door, just after midnight, with 2 flashlights and a grin that said, "We're doing this." We slipped out the back and followed the dirt road until we reached the signpost pine brush trail, overgrown and splintered. No one had walked it in years, but the air felt alive. Like the trees knew we were there. Like they were holding their breath, about 30 minutes in. We saw it, a faint golden glow flickering in the distance between the trunks. At first we thought it was a reflection from our flashlights, but it swayed like someone was walking with it. A lantern, old, dim, floating at just the right height, to be carried by a man. We stopped. "You see that?" Levi whispered. "I see it," I said. We stood still for a long time, just watching. The light bobbed forward, then stopped. Then again, as if inviting us. I should have said no. Every nerve in my body screamed to leave. But Levi took a step forward, and I followed. As we moved closer, things began to shift. Our flashlights flickered. The undergrowth got soft and squishy like we were stepping on something long dead. The air smelled like rust and ash. We passed trees with bark that looked clawed through, and then, we saw him. He was tall. Too tall. Draped in a filthy coat. Skin pale like damp paper. Face mostly hidden beneath the shadow of a brimmed hat. One hand held the lantern. The other hung beside him, twisted at an impossible angle, the fingers long and gnarled. He didn't move. Not until we stepped into the clearing. Then his head turned, not slowly snapped. Straight toward us. I grabbed Levi's arm. "We need to go." But Levi didn't respond. He just stood there, mouth open, staring like something had sunk a hook into his mind and reeled him in. That's when more lights appeared. Dozens. Flickering between the trees. Each light attached to a figure, some barely human, some crawling, some tall and faceless. All watching, all inching closer. I screamed his name and yanked him backward. It was like ripping someone from the bottom of a lake. He gasped like he'd been underwater, and we ran. We didn't look back, not even once. But I heard them, twigs breaking, lantern glass clinking, that low humming soft and old, like a funeral hymn sung through teeth. When we burst into Grandma's house, she didn't ask where we'd been. She was waiting on the porch, rocking slowly, holding a shotgun across her lap. "You saw him," she said, "didn't you?" I nodded. She made us take salt baths that night, left iron nails outside our bedroom doors. She slept in a chair, holding that gun all night long. For weeks after, Levi wouldn't talk much. He said he kept dreaming of the man with the lantern standing at the foot of his bed, watching, waiting, not moving. Months passed. We went home, tried to forget. Years later, Levi disappeared. He was camping with friends in the Smokies. They found the tent, the gear, but no sign of him. Just footprints leading into the woods. And one strange detail. One of the campers claimed they saw a small flickering light the night before, like a lantern moving between the trees. Now I know what you're thinking. Why would I share this? Why open the door again? Because last night, I saw that light again. Outside my window, miles away from pine brush. The lantern man doesn't stay in the woods. Once you've seen him, really seen him, he follows. He waits. He watches Dot, and one day, when you least expect it, he'll raise that lantern again. And this time, you might not run fast enough. Let's move to our 8th story, ... They call it the Singing Hollow, a narrow, sunken ravine deep in the Appalachian Mountains, where no birds sing, and no echo returns your voice. Locals speak of it in half-mumbled warnings, like a nursery rhyme, cursed with too much truth. It's the sort of place that doesn't appear on modern maps, though it's been marked in oral traditions for generations. Not as a location to visit, but as one to forget. Our story begins with Clara Whitmore, a 32-year-old park ranger and backcountry specialist, with over a decade of Appalachian experience. Clara was known for her rationality. She didn't scare easily. She had rescued lost hikers and whiteouts, dealt with territorial bears, and survived a rock slide. Her professionalism was unmatched, and she'd often roll her eyes at the ghost. stories whispered by seasonal rangers. But that changed in the summer of 2019. That season, the Forestry Department announced a controversial plan: reopen disused trails for ecotourism. Clara was assigned to assess one of these trails, an old logging routes abandoned sometime in the 1920s. It had no name on the department's records. But when she stopped to fuel up in the nearest town, an elderly man at the gas station stared at her map for an unusually long time. Then he tapped a finger on a shaded ravine and said, "You don't want to go there. That's Singing Hollow. The land there remembers things." Clara, polite but unimpressed, thanked him and continued on. She began her hike early, expecting a half-day journey, but the trail was barely visible, tangled with vines and overgrowth. Her GPS flickered, losing signal repeatedly, and she marked trees with biodegradable tape to ensure her return. The deeper she traveled, the quieter the forest became. Birds that had chirped cheerfully near the trailhead vanished. No rustling leaves, no crickets. Just the dull crunch of her boots, and then a hum. Faint at first, like the resonance of a cello string. It seemed to come from beneath her feet, vibrating through the soles of her boots. She paused, took out her radio, and reported her position. Static. Nothing but static. The humming deepened, almost melodic, almost inviting. She tried to rationalize: it may be wind, through a cave system, or the distant sound of a river. Yet there was no wind, and there was no water on the map. Soon, the terrain began to subtly change. Trees curved unnaturally. Some appeared to grow in spirals, and there were carvings on their bark, not graffiti or initials, but circular patterns, symmetrical, yet chaotic. She photographed them, intending to report possible cult activity. Hours passed. Dusk began to bleed across the sky. She checked her watch. It was later than it should have been, much later. Her internal clock didn't match the sun's descent. She turned back, following her marked trail. But the biodegradable tape was gone. Every single piece. She should have panicked, but panic felt ... muffled. That's when the singing started. Soft, feminine, layered harmonies. Not from one direction, but all around her. The kind of sound that doesn't travel through air, but through bone. She called out, thinking perhaps there were campers nearby. No response. She shouted louder. Her voice didn't echo. Something was terribly wrong. She pulled out her emergency flare, lit it, and began to climb the ridge in hopes of cell reception. Her limbs felt heavier. The forest tilted oddly. Trees shifted when she blinked, and once she saw herself, or someone who looked exactly like her, standing far down the path, facing away. She ran. In any direction. She didn't care. Branches clawed at her face. Blood trickled down her cheek. She emerged into a clearing. There in the center was an old stone, circle-weathered, overgrown, half-sunken into the earth. Something about it felt wrong, as if it hadn't been built, but grown. In the center stood a wooden totem, a carved figure with too many eyes and no mouth. The singing surged, louder now, not voices herself, singing in her own voice. Then the ground split. She awoke the next morning inside the ranger cabin, lying on the porch as though placed there gently. Her boots were gone, her radio smashed. Her trail bag was 11 miles away. Found a week later, at the foot of an abandoned mine. Co-workers found her staring out the window, mumbling an unfamiliar tune. She took leave from the Park Service, but she wasn't the same. She spoke less, ate less, and at night, she would wake up screaming, fingers digging into her ears, trying to silence the harmony. Months later, a folklorist named Dr. Janus Hillman contacted her. He had studied Singing Hollow legends for decades. She shared her story. He told her she wasn't the first, and wouldn't be the last. Singing Hollow, he explained, wasn't a place. It was a resonance. A pattern of sound designed to attract those sensitive enough to hear it. To pull them in, to keep them. When she asked what the song was saying, Dr. Hillman responded, "It sings to itself, remembering what it once was, and what it will be again." Clara vanished 2 weeks later. Her phone was found near a spring in Tennessee. The last video on it showed her face, illuminated by flashlight. Behind her, in the dark, figures swayed. Not dancing, not alive. And from the forest came a low harmonic hum. Soft, deep, and unending. Somewhere, deep in the hollow, the song continues. And, if you hear it, don't hum along. Don't listen, and for the love of whatever still watches this earth, ... don't follow it. Let's move to our 9th story, ... Title: The Man Who Came Down the Mountain There. Something ancient about the Appalachian Mountains. Something more than just time and erosion. Something watching, listening, waiting. Jacob Evers never believed in that kind of talk. He was a park ranger, not a storyteller. After 2 decades patrolling the southern range of the Appalachian Trail, Jacob thought he'd seen it all. Injured hikers, bear attacks, rock slides, even the occasional body. But what happened during his final patrol in 2017 wasn't something he could categorize or explain, not in a report. Not even in therapy. He filed it as a routine search and rescue. Found the missing person. Closed the case, but the truth. The story Jacob finally told me, 3 years after he left the Ranger Service, is not what made it to the official record. And if what he said is real, the mountains are hiding something far worse than people want to believe. It was early October, the kind of time when the wind starts to smell like wet leaves and distant firewood. Jacob was patrolling the edge of Devil's Ridge, an unmaintained section of mountain terrain known for its jagged paths and dense forest. Few hikers ventured that deep, and those who did usually came prepared. But this hiker hadn't. His name was Luke Travers, 232, out-of-state, amateur backpacker, hiking solo. He'd been missing for 5 days when the distress signal came, through just a single GPS ping from his emergency beacon. Coordinates only accessible on foot. About 6 miles from the nearest ranger station. Jacob geared up and headed out before dusk. The forest was silent. Too silent. That's the first thing he noticed. No wind, no birds, no bugs, just this thick, still air that pressed down on him like a weighted blanket. Even his radio crackled strangely, not with static, but with echoes. He swore he heard his own voice replayed back at him from hours ago, and then he found the gear. Luke's backpack was torn open, lying beneath a snapped pine tree, not claw marks, torn like it had been ripped apart by hand, clothes scattered, water bottles emptied. His emergency blanket was draped over a fallen log, almost ceremonially, but there were no tracks. No signs of wildlife, not even broken branches. That's when Jacob heard the voice. Faint, hoarse. Help me, please. It came from somewhere downslope in the brush. Jacob followed it. He called out, "Luke, is that you? This is Ranger Evers. I'm here to help." Number. Response. Then again, help. Each time, the voice sounded closer, even though Jacob wasn't moving that fast, like it was anticipating him. He descended nearly 400 feet into a part of the valley he'd never entered before. Thick trees, unnaturally gnarled, with moss-covered stones and strange claw-like roots. Everything was wet, but it hadn't rained in days. And there, in a dry creek bed, he saw something standing barefoot. It looked like Luke, same face, same clothes, although torn and caked in mud, but his stance was wrong to still. Too symmetrical. He didn't blink, didn't sway. His arms hung straight at his sides like a mannequin dot. Jacob called out, "Luke." The man smiled. A slow, unnatural curl of the lips that exposed pale gums. His head tilted, not curiously, but like someone testing how far flesh can stretch. Then he spoke, not yelled, not whispered, just spoke. "You found me." Jacob's stomach turned. Every instinct told him to run. But years of training made him step forward. "Are you hurt? Can you walk?" The figure said nothing. Then, "You're not supposed to see me yet," and vanished, not ran, not ducked into the trees. Vanished. Jacob didn't sleep that night. He climbed out of the valley and drove back to the station, adrenaline pushing him past the exhaustion. He didn't tell anyone what he saw. Just filled out the paperwork, noted the GPS location, and requested backup. The next morning, search teams found Luke's actual body, 3 miles away, half buried under leaves, bones broken. dead for at least a week. There was no way the man Jacob saw was Luke Travers. No way. Weeks passed. Jacob requested transfer, then leave, then retirement. But before he left the station for good, he told his fellow ranger, and later told me what truly broke him. It wasn't the mimic. It wasn't the voice. It was what he found in the weeks after. He went back just once, to the creek bed. Not to chase ghosts, but to prove it was in his head. He camped nearby, recorded sounds overnight. And in the early morning, as frost still clung to the moss, he found a set of bare human footprints around his tent, not walking, circling, and a whisper left etched into the bark of a tree beside his fire pit. "Thank you for looking." Locals call them the Hollow Men. Not ghosts, not creatures. Something else, something that copies the lost, not to save them, but to replace them. And in the deep woods of the Appalachian Mountains, where no cameras reach, where search parties turn up empty, and where the cries for help never sound quite right, they're still there, still watching, still waiting for someone to see them. Too soon. Let's move to our 10 Saints story. Deep in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, where the dense forests close in like a living wall, and the air hangs heavy with ancient secrets, lies the long-forgotten town of Black Hollow. To the untrained eye, it's nothing more than a cluster of crumbling cabins and collapsed barns, swallowed by ivy and moss. A ghostly relic from another time. But to those who grew up near these mountains, Black Hollow is a name spoken with a mixture of fear and reverence. Ominous reminder of something dark and terrible that happened there decades ago. The town vanished overnight, leaving behind no clear explanation. Just stories of strange lights flickering through the woods, unsettling noises in the night, and people disappearing without a trace. Few dared to venture near, and those who did rarely came back the same. Laura Harper was one of those rare few, a young folklorist from the city fascinated by the Appalachian legends. Her grandmother used to whisper to her as a child. Driven by a need to uncover the truth behind these eerie tales, she packed her camera gear and hiking supplies and set off into the wilderness, determined to document Black Hollow's mysteries firsthand. She had spent months researching old maps, interviewing locals, and preparing herself mentally for whatever might lie ahead. Still, nothing could prepare her for the suffocating silence that greeted her as she stepped into the overgrown clearing where Black Hollow once thrived. The sun was setting, casting long shadows that twisted like fingers through the trees, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. Laura's footsteps crunched softly on the leaf-strewn ground as she approached the skeletal remains of the town. Dilapidated cabins leaned at odd angles, their windows dark and empty like hollow eyes. A rusty swing creaked in the faint breeze, as if moved by an unseen child. Everywhere she looked, she saw symbols roughly carved into tree trunks, etched into rocks, and scrawled across the weathered wood of doors. The symbols pulsed with a strange energy, almost as if the forest itself was alive and watching. Setting up camp for the night, Laura felt the weight of the mountain's history pressing in on her. She reviewed her notes and recordings, trying to stay grounded, but as darkness fell, the forest transformed. The usual sounds of wildlife fell silent, replaced by a low, almost imperceptible whispering that seemed to weave through the trees. At first, she thought it was the wind, but the whispers grew clearer, becoming voices mournful, pleading, and filled with warning. Her heart quickened as she realized she was not alone. Over the next few days, Laura explored the ruins, discovering scattered journals and faded photographs hidden in the hollowed remains of a cabin's attic. The writings belonged to a man named Thomas Crane, a logger who once lived in Black Hollow. His entries spoke of a secret cult dedicated to an entity they called the Wendigoa, malevolent spirit from local folklore that consumed souls and thrived on human suffering. The townsfolk believed they could appease the Wendigo with offerings, but over time, the creature's hunger grew insatiable. Thomas's last entry was frantic and chilling, describing how the forest bled and how neighbors vanished one by one, leaving behind nothing but silence and shadows. On her third night, Laura's camp was disturbed by strange sounds: footsteps circling her tent, twigs snapping, and a heavy breathing just beyond the reach of her flashlight. Her breath caught in her throat as she shone the beam into the darkness, catching glimpses of glowing eyes reflecting back at her. Fear gnawed at her, but curiosity pushed her onward. She tried to convince herself it was animals, but the eyes seemed too large, too intelligent, too hungry. Sleep became impossible. Each night, her dreams were invaded by horrific visions. Twisted faces snarling in the dark, clawed hands reaching out from beneath the earth, and the Wendigo's growls echoing through the void. The boundary between reality and nightmare began to blur. One morning, she awoke to find strange symbols freshly carved around her tent, their sharp edges glistening with dew, as if marking her as prey. Determined to understand, Laura searched deeper, uncovering a hidden cavern beneath the ruins of the town's church. The air inside was thick and stale, and the walls were stained with dried blood and ancient runes. At the cavern's center stood a crude altar, littered with bones and shredded cloth, the remnants of past rituals. As she moved closer, a guttural growl filled the chamber, freezing her in place. From the shadows emerged the Wendigo, a grotesque, gaunt figure with eyes like burning coals and skin stretched tight over protruding bones. It was neither fully human nor beast, its presence radiating pure malevolence, heart-pounding. Laura stumbled back, her voice caught in her throat. The creature lunged, but she fled, the Wendigo's ragged footsteps thundering behind her. She raced through the labyrinthine forest, branches clawing at her face and clothes as she fought to stay ahead. Behind her, the creature's howls echoed, a chilling symphony of despair and rage. Laura's flight was desperate and relentless. She was exhausted, injured, and haunted by the creature's relentless pursuit. Finally, she burst from the woods onto a dirt road, collapsing near an abandoned truck. Her camera, still recording, captured her final frantic breaths and a desperate plea. "If you find this, don't come here. Black Hollow is alive, and it's hungry." Weeks later, search parties found her abandoned gear, but no sign of Laura. Locals whispered that the Wendigo claimed another soul, feeding the dark hunger of the mountain. Some say on moonless nights, you can still hear Laura's terrified screams mingling with the wind, a ghostly warning to those foolish enough to enter Black Hollow. The forest waits, patient and hungry, its ancient curse far from broken. Let's move to our 11th story, a tale buried deep within the folds of the Appalachian Mountains, whispered across generations, scribbled in faded journals, and passed from elder to child like a warning disguised as a bedtime story. It begins with a man named Samuel Riggs, a reclusive woodsman who had lived alone for over 2 decades in a weather-worn cabin tucked into a remote valley only the most experienced trackers could find. Samuel wasn't like other locals. He didn't just respect the woods, he revered them. He spoke to trees as if they were old friends and left offerings near creeks for creatures most folks said were just folk tales. He'd inherited the cabin and land from his grandfather, who had warned him drunkenly, yet dead serious, never to cross the Black Hollow Trail during the harvest moon. For years, Samuel obeyed that rule without question, until one particularly grim October, when his food stores had spoiled, his firewood had rotted from within, and his traps had come up eerily empty for days. With frost creeping over the ridges and starvation looming, desperation gnawed away his caution. So on the eve of the harvest moon, rifle in hand and guilt in his heart, Samuel set out down the forbidden trail, telling himself the old stories were just superstition, but every part of his body knew otherwise. The moment he stepped past the crooked willow that marked the boundary, the forest changed. It was as if he had crossed some invisible membrane. Colors dulled, sound faded, and the trees grew unnaturally tall and narrow, their branches twisting like fingers trying to block the sky. The path narrowed into nothing, forcing Samuel to bushwhack with a growing sense of dread. Then came the silence, not just the absence of animals, but a total, suffocating vacuum of sound, broken only by the crunch of his own boots. And then he heard it, a distant, sorrowful lullaby carried on a wind that didn't rustle a single leaf. It was a woman's voice, ethereal and heart-wrenching, humming a tune that stirred something ancient in his bones. Compelled by something beyond logic, Samuel followed it. Hours seemed to pass, or maybe just minutes. Time unraveled in that part of the woods. He eventually stumbled into a clearing he swore had never existed on any map or memory. At its center stood a massive, gnarled tree wrapped in rusted chains, its bark blackened and pulsing as though alive. Beneath it stood Hertha, source of the song, a woman in a decaying white dress, her back turned to him, her long black hair floating slightly as if under water. Samuel called out, but she didn't move. When he stepped closer, the temperature dropped so suddenly his breath froze in the air, and she slowly turned to face him. Her eyes were not eyes at all, but hollow sockets glowing faintly blue, and her mouth hung open in a silent scream. Samuel fell back in terror, and the forest exploded in sound, the chain-rattling groans of unseen figures, the clatter of skeletal feet among the roots, and the distant sound of children laughing in reverse. The woman spoke not with words, but through memory. In an instant, Samuel saw her past as if living it, a bride betrayed on her wedding night, murdered by her husband and his family to claim her land, her body buried beneath the cursed tree. She had cursed them with her final breath, and their souls, along with hers, had become trapped, here twisted, vengeful, and desperate for release. Samuel screamed as shadowy figures emerged around him, gaunt, long-limbed wraiths that walked, as if broken. He fired his rifle, but the bullet passed through them like mist. Just as they closed in, the woman let out a banshee wail that split the sky, and the world went black. When Samuel awoke, he was lying outside his cabin, clothes shredded, arms scratched with symbols he didn't recognize. He staggered inside, locked the door, and stayed that way for days, too afraid to even light a fire. From that day on, he never hunted again, never left the property. He muttered constantly to himself, repeated the lullaby in broken fragments, and covered all mirrors, claiming he could see her watching him through them. The townsfolk eventually stopped visiting. Years passed, and one winter, after a snowstorm, his cabin was found empty, no blood, no footprints, nothing but a woman's humming echoing in the woods and chains, hanging loosely from the crooked willow that now stood twisted and burned. And now, hikers who stray too far into the Black Hollow Trail during the harvest moon often report dreams of a weeping bride, a blackened tree, and a sensation of being watched by something ancient and angry. Some wake up with symbols scratched into their arms, others never wake up at all. So if you ever find yourself in the Appalachian wilds and hear a lullaby with no source, turn around. Whatever you do, don't follow it. Because once you step beyond the crooked willow, the forest remembers you, and it doesn't let go.